Now, I realize that I may have disturbed the ghost of your third president by mentioning him in the same speech as the Constitution of the European Union. If you can hear a rattling sound, it is Jefferson's shade clanking its chains, because how offensive can you be to the drafter of your sublime Constitution by mentioning it even in passing in the same speech as the one that we're having in Europe? You know, it wasn't I who first made that comparison. The comparison was made extraordinarily, bizarrely, by the father of the European Constitution. Now, do you know who I mean by Valéry Giscard d'Estaing? He was president of France and an enormously distinguished man. The dignity of the Élysée Palace still hangs about his shoulders in a way that makes you reluctant so much as to sneeze in his presence. And whenever I see him, I'm reminded of a line of Mallarmé that describing a character as being si extraordinairement distingué, so extraordinarily distinguished that whenever I bid him bonjour, he makes me feel I'd said merde, and that's the effect that Giscard always had on me. Anyway, when he launched the process of drafting a constitution for Europe, he was unlimited in his self-regard. He said, "This is our Philadelphia moment." And then he went on to compare himself directly to Jefferson. Now, you can criticize that on so many grounds, the arrogance, the presumption, but how about this? The most obvious one of all, that Jefferson wasn't there in Philadelphia. He was, as Giscard might have been expected to know, at the time, ambassador to France. Or, you'll correct me if I'm wrong about this, right? And look at the difference. Look at the difference between the Constitution that your founders came up with and the Constitution that we are drafting now in Europe. Yours, with all 27 amendments, is 7,600 words. Ours, before any amendments, is 76,000 words. Yours is mainly about the freedom of the individual. Ours is mainly about the powers of the state. Your Declaration of Independence holds out the promise of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Our Charter of Fundamental Rights guarantees our entitlement to strike action, affordable housing, and free health care. In fact, you can see it right from the opening words. Your Constitution begins, "We the people." The foundational treaty of the European Union, the Treaty of Rome, begins, "His Majesty the King of the Belgians." And there you see the difference between a top-down constitution imposed by the elites and one that has grown up based around the idea of the dispersal of power. The truth is that all nations, all polities, all unions tend to grow according to the DNA encoded at the moment of their foundation. You were very lucky in your timing. You drafted your constitution at the moment in Western thought when there was maximum emphasis on personal freedom and the rights of man. Your founders understood, having fought against it, where the concentration of power could lead. And that is why they based their system around this ALEC foundational principle of the maximum dispersal of power. Unfortunately, the European Union, too, is a child of its time. Its founders had been scarred by the experience of the Second World War and the plebiscitary democracy that had preceded it. And they were convinced that public opinion was a very dangerous thing, that if left untrammeled, it would lead to fascism and war. They saw democracy not as an antidote to tyranny, but rather as the potential ally or midwife of dictatorship. And that is why they designed this system where supreme power was vested in the hands of officials who were made deliberately invulnerable to public opinion. Now, I think Jefferson had a thought about the European Union too. This is what he said. He may not have been actually talking about the European Union, but it applies pretty well. He said, "I do verily believe that if the principle were to prevail of a single consolidated government, it would become the most corrupt government on the earth. And the EU is determined to prove him right about that." It may astonish you to learn that for 14 years now, the European Union has failed to have its budget approved by its own auditors. 14 years in a row, the accountants look at it and they say, "No, we can't sign off on the books. Too much of the money is being lost or stolen. We can definitively account for only 9% of total spending. Not to say that all the rest is necessarily being stolen, we just don't know. Until 2 years ago, and this is just, I find it amazing that I'm coming here and saying this, but the European Commission operated an accounting system where there was no double-entry bookkeeping. So all the accounts were held basically on Excel spreadsheets and could be retrospectively doctored to say whatever suited you. They did bring in an accountant who came up with a solution to this problem, and she said, look, we've got to change this and that and the other. And did they act on her advice? Yes, they did. They immediately fired her. And she's now come back as a member of the European Parliament in my region, representing the UK Independence Party. Now, look, I'm not here, I haven't come here just to pour scorn on the European Union. Well, I mean, I have slightly actually come here to pour scorn on the European Union, but that isn't my primary purpose, my friends, because the European Union, you'll be delighted to hear, is my problem, not your problem, right? I come here with a rather different purpose, which is to ask you to contrast your system with those that pertain elsewhere in the world, and to hold fast to something so precious that it may have become worn and slippery through overuse, and its luster may have dulled in your eyes through sheer familiarity. Your system, your Jeffersonian democracy, those principles set out in the ALEC mission statement that we've heard so many times that we can easily stop thinking about them, have served to make your country rich and free and strong. And the promise of your Constitution didn't serve only to secure liberty on this continent, it drove your fathers to carry the promise of freedom to every continent, something for which the world is in your debt. And that is why it worries me so much when I see tendencies in this country aimed at subverting the principles on which you were founded. When an American government sets out to nationalize your banks, it makes your country less American. When an American government bails out your auto industry, it makes your country less American. When an American government decrees these massive increases in public spending in the stimulus packages, it makes your country less American. When it socializes the economy in the name of climate change, it makes your country less American. When it moves towards a European style of social security, it makes your country less American. And when it seeks to nationalize your healthcare, it makes your country less American. And in making it less American, it makes it less independent and less prosperous and less free. Let me tell you about the realities of a national healthcare system. We've lived with one for 60 years in my country. And the first thing is that you are terrified of ending up in a national health hospital. 7,000 people died last year, 7,000 identified cases, heaven knows how many others, from afflictions that they picked up in hospital unrelated to the condition which they entered to have treated. Our hospitals are dirty places. They're places that you have to queue to get into. People frequently die while waiting for operations. Now look, these things can be easily anecdotal, right? Everyone can say, I had a good or a bad experience. But what is not anecdotal is the empirical data on these survival rates. You know, if you get prostate cancer in the United Kingdom, you are 4 times as likely to die as if you get it in the United States. If you get breast cancer in the United Kingdom, your survival rate is 1/4 of what it is in the United States. Ditto for heart disease, ditto for stroke, ditto for surgery.